It's 1973 on a run-of-the-mill Tuesday afternoon on the Isle of Wight, a picturesque and stereotypically English island off of the country's southern coast. It's a popular year-round tourist destination, and our witness is one of the many holidaymakers that flocks to the resort town of Sandown that year. On this warm May afternoon, 7-year-old Faye would encounter something that has evolved into a massive paranormal cold case, one that remains well and truly unsolved to this day. He's referred to by many names, All Colours Sam, the Ghost Clown, but we'll refer to him by his most common moniker, the Sandown Clown. Was he a cryptid, an alien, a robot, or simply a human? To this day, Faye maintains that what she saw was something beyond the mundane, and let me tell you, it makes for one hell of a story either way. In tonight's episode, we're going to be taking a deep dive into one of the most outright bizarre paranormal cases the world has ever seen. Every turn of this tale raises more questions than it answers, and there's something about the case that carries a certain haunting beauty, one that you don't tend to see in mysteries such as these. For that reason, it's one of my absolute favourites. Join us as we meet none other than the Sandown Clown. I'm Tom, this is Niall, and welcome to the Campfire Archives. So Niall, I don't think you've heard of this one before, have you?
Sandown Clown, never heard of before.
Never heard of it?
No idea what it's about, other than the name gives me some clue, but yeah. From
the title alone, any ideas initially?
Well, based on that intro, someone is going to encounter someone who looks like a clown is about all I can take from it, but that's it.
You're pretty on the money. So without further ado, let's dive into the sighting. So the Isle of Wight in the 1970s was a major bustling tourist spot. It had music festivals, seaside attractions, crowded guest houses. That summer's afternoon, young Faye and her unnamed friend decided to escape to the fields surrounding the Sandown golf links. The pair began to play around a stream running through the outskirts of a wood, when all of a sudden they were alerted to the strangest of noises. Faye would describe it as a weird ambulance siren-like wailing noise. It was definitely mechanical or electronic at least, but what on earth could have been making such a sound out in the sticks like that? There were no cars, no people, certainly no ambulances. The children decided to follow the sound along the creek until they reached the edge of a swampy meadow. There they saw him emerging from underneath a bridge over the stream like a true creature of legend. First came the hand, then the arm, then the rest of the body. He towered over the children even by adult standards. Faye described him as being 7 feet tall, and he lacked any semblance of a neck. His head was simply wedged straight onto his shoulders, and that head in itself was stranger still. His eyes were unblinking, soulless triangular markings which seemed to have been scrawled on his pale white face crudely with marker pen, rather than being biological features. Moreover, his eyes looked like they were peering out of the world from behind a transparent mask-like sheet of glass. His lips were bright yellow and didn't move once throughout the entirety of Faye's encounter. What struck the children most, however, was that this thing, whatever he might have been, was humanoid, resembling a clown that somebody might have encountered on the Sandown seafront. He wore what looked like a pointed yellow hat with 2 antennae projecting from the top, a simple green tunic with a bright red collar, and plain white trousers. Beneath the hat ran a wispy lock of red hair, and the cuffs of his shirt also bore antennae like the ones on his head. Now at this point, you might be thinking that this man must have been a local, maybe a crackhead from the seafront or one of the local tourist attractions who wandered off into the woods. Faye was adamant in her testimony that this figure only had 3 digits on each hand and foot. He wore blue gloves on his hands, and he didn't seem to be wearing any shoes, with his plain white feet firmly planted on the ground. So there's a lot to take in there, but any initial thoughts on that?
I mean, no idea, Tom.
No.
It sounds so bizarre. I'm trying to form this image of it in my head, and it's incredibly difficult because every feature is so weird and unique. I can see why he's called the Sandown Clown. There are certainly elements of that. The hat, the eyes sound like, what you imagine when you think of as clown makeup. But 3 toes on each foot, the weird antenna, like what sounds almost like a space helmet, especially when they talk about no neck, it sounds like, super bizarre description so far.
Really not the kind of thing that you'd expect to experience anywhere in the UK, let alone on a little remote island.
If I saw that, I wouldn't be thinking clown.
Yeah.
I don't know what I'd be thinking, but I don't think it'd be clown. I think I'd be thinking run.
Pretty much.
Yeah.
Even as a child, you wouldn't be, or maybe you would, but I wouldn't be approaching it.
Especially as a child. Yeah. And, kids have vivid imaginations. I'm not saying this guy's necessarily 7 foot tall, but he's clearly a big fella. Like, again, I'd be straight out of there.
I think for them to note the size and weird appearance is like something that you wouldn't expect if they'd just seen a person.
Absolutely.
Even as a kid, they're gonna recognize if it's just a person.
Absolutely.
When the kids approached this seemingly otherworldly being, he was crouched down next to the creek, and it looked like he was trying to fish out what looked like a book that had fallen in. Eventually, he retrieved it, and he proceeded to walk in a weird, awkward hopping gait, raising each leg high before arriving at what looked like a tiny metal shack in the tree line. The kids followed him. This being hadn't even seemed to notice the kids at this point, but he reached into the shack and retrieved what looked like a microphone with several black knobs adorning it round the side, and a wire which ran back into the little makeshift building. And then he spoke, or not really spoke. He didn't move his mouth, but words came out, and the children clearly heard him ask if they were still there. Now, weirdly, the children didn't feel that this creature, whatever he was any form of threat. They approached him, and he began to scribble on what looked like a sheet of paper. He pointed to his words in turn, which read, "Hello, and I am all colours, Sam." Sam invited the kids back into his metal shack, which was completely windowless, and the children began to speak to him back. Faye asked if he was a man, to which Sam replied, "Well, not really, but I am in an odd sort of way." From here, the two children spent around half an hour with the clown-like being in the shack, which he told them that he had just made. In Faye's recollection, she would comment on the inside of the building as having been wallpapered in blue-green hues, and that a control panel-like structure was placed against the wall atop a metallic floor. Sam seemed to dodge any questions that were sent his way, and instead attempted to distract the children by showing them how he ate food. So according to Faye, he picked up a berry and placed it first in his ear, and the kids watched in bewilderment that same berry then appeared in his eye and then in his mouth. Among the few things that Sam did tell them was a statement regarding others of his kind. He told the kids that he has several friends on Earth who are also like him, but they are too afraid to interact with humans, and therefore keep themselves hidden. He didn't specify anything about where they might be or what they are. He just said that they're here on Earth somewhere. What do you think to that?
There's a lot to unpack there. My first thought, before we covered that segment there, was this sounds to me, on the face of it, like a really vivid imagination in kids. How old are they? 10 years old, did you say?
7.
7. There's a few things there that they've said which I find slightly unnerving, which I don't know if necessarily a 7-year-old would come up with. The idea of him having other friends on Earth who were too scared to interact with humans, I thought was a really unusual point to make. I am all colours Sam. I don't know why. I find that quite unnerving.
It's a weird thing to say, isn't it?
It is, and it doesn't I could be wrong, but it doesn't immediately feel like something a kid would make up. It's an odd name for a... I can't really explain why, but something about that just I find a little bit unsettling. And then finally, when they ask him if he's a man, he says, "Well, kind of, but not really." Again, maybe I'm underestimating these kids, but that feels like a really weird thing for a kid to invent.
Yeah, from what I understand as well, Faye has never moved on that. It's really specific to have said, and I kind of agree. I don't think that children would come up with something quite as specific, and it all feels quite consistent with his character of being this janky, weird, unexplainable, otherworldly spaceman-looking thing.
It absolutely does, and I guess it almost doesn't feel fun enough.
No,
for a 7-year-old to make up.
It doesn't.
It's not. It's not that exciting. I am all colours Sam, kind of, but not really. Yeah, I find that quite creepy, Tom.
It's more ambiguous, isn't it, than if a kid was just making something up or had a character that they've just made up. They'd probably create them to be a little bit more almost fantastical.
Fantastical, more obvious. Yeah. I totally agree.
That does actually bring us near to the end of the story as it stands. It has something of an unsatisfying ending. Half an hour passed and the children said their goodbyes to this being and wandered back to where they'd been playing before they found him. In the same bit of marshy field that they met him, 2 construction men were reportedly working nearby. They missed the whole thing. There was no indication that they'd seen anything happen, and they just said hello to the kids and they went on their way.
Out of interest, did they report hearing the siren?
No, nothing. They were completely ambivalent to the whole thing. The area in which the children reportedly encountered him was searched soon after and has been frequently investigated by paranormal researchers over the years. Nothing was ever found, no mark where the metal shack would have been, no footprints, no technology left behind, nothing. Even the foliage of the area was completely normal, untouched. His shack had simply just disappeared moments after the children said goodbye. They went on their way, spoke to their parents, and this story then began starting to circulate. So before we get into the theories, have you got anything else that you think might be associated with this creature? Any idea of what it could be at all?
Well, it's interesting. I did have a theory, but it's effectively just been kiboshed by that last statement about how the area was searched, they found nothing. Realistically, I think 2 kids out in the woods, is this some kind of, I don't know, it could be a creep, it could just be someone who's living off grid, something like that. But number one, the fact they found no shack, and number 2, there was no markings or evidence that one had ever been there, so it wasn't like it was a camper van or something similar. But even that description, I know where we're going to go with this, I think, but it almost sounds a bit like a spaceship.
Exactly.
They talked about a control panel that, and how it was metallic. They describe it as a shack, obviously. It's interesting, but like I say, my one thought was, could this just be somebody living off grid? And it sounds like that's not the case because we didn't find any evidence of this.
You would think as well, if children were going to come up with the idea of a spaceship, would they really just describe it as something as mundane as a shack with blue walls and a control panel?
And why wouldn't you say, oh, and it had an engine, it had wings on it? Why wouldn't they be describing what to them would be, I presume, a rocket ship or a flying saucer? Why wouldn't they say it was spherical shaped? Maybe I'm underestimating these kids, but I feel like that's where they would go with it.
And supposedly he had just made it when they arrived as well. That's what he told them, that he'd just put this thing together.
Interesting.
Which would explain why it looks like a shack and not maybe like a big intergalactic spaceship looking thing.
And these kids, it does sound like the blue gloves, the yellow hat, the makeup on the face for the eyes. It does sound like, whether they're making this up or it's what they're interpreting it as, it does feel like a clown. I can see, but there's also those elements like what sounds like a helmet, what the antenna coming out of his sleeve, etc. The 3 digits on his hand, which you would have thought would also be very inconsistent with a clown, and, dare I say, sounds like some kind of spaceman.
Exactly. They were supposedly able to hear this huge droning, beeping siren noise long before they actually saw him. They followed the sound, and there he was.
Again, bizarre. I keep forgetting about this because the construction men didn't hear it, but yeah, what on earth is that about? And him being down in the creek, picking up a book. Again, what's the significance of that? It's a weird thing to throw into the story. It's like a thread that never gets pulled. And
it wasn't mentioned as to what that was either. He just picked up this book from the creek, took it back into the shack, unmentioned.
Interesting.
With this being such a prominent case, there are a lot of explanations as to what he might have been, both from people who believe and people who don't. The people who believe say that he was indeed the real deal, as you might have guessed. An alien, either fallen to or investigating Earth, who just happened to encounter 2 children as he prepared to return to the skies in whatever this little shack thing was. Could that initial siren sound have been his, as you say, been his craft landing? Maybe. It's maybe a little bit of a far-fetched explanation to just jump to he was an alien. But as far as alien stories go, it all adds up. It's all there. If we are to believe that this is an alien, perhaps this is how somebody might encounter one.
Especially a 7-year-old.
Exactly, yeah.
And, yeah, like you say, it's not that I'm saying this is an alien, or even that we've ever encountered aliens. I just don't know. But it is an interesting explanation, and it does make sense. And if we were to encounter them, I don't know, this feels like a more realistic account than some I've heard. shall we say, if that makes sense.
It definitely does. There's a lot more certain detail of what he looked like, and these kids, as I say, I know they're children, but perhaps if we are to take this on board as maybe like a legitimate account, then they spent enough time around him to definitely get a good look at these unhuman features. He said the 3 digits on each hand, the fact that his facial features seem to have been drawn on. Maybe he's from another world where whatever species he might be did not evolve to look anything like us. Others suggest, and this to me is a little bit more tenuous, that he might have been a ghost, so his features and form obscured by his passage from one world to the next. The fact that the workmen in the field failed to notice anything to do with him has been cited as backup for this, and he is actually referred to as the ghost clown in some accounts, but I just don't see it myself. It's nothing like any other ghost story that I've heard.
Yeah, and again, like you, Tom, I'm not saying I believe in ghosts. I'm very much agnostic to it. I think you're on a similar vein. However, if we pull that thread a little bit, like you say, it doesn't sound like any ghost sighting I've ever seen.
No.
Or heard of.
Completely inhuman.
Completely inhuman. Why does he have a shack with a control panel? Why is he wearing a hat? Why does he have these antennae? Why does he have 3 toes, on each foot? That doesn't make sense with me. And if you're going to go the paranormal route, I prefer the extraterrestrial angle to it than this ghost
same.
one.
It doesn't really fit in with reports of ghosts from anywhere that I've seen before. It would, if we are to put something, if we're to link it to something paranormal, then I feel like Alien is maybe the way to go. There is another one that would maybe be a little bit more attractive than the idea of a ghost as well, which is the idea that the children somehow stepped into another realm of reality, maybe crossing some sort of unusual rift in time and space when they heard this noise, encountering a creature quite literally not of this existence. The interdimensional traveler theory has then been proposed, so maybe somebody who doesn't experience time and space in the same way we do, somebody from an alternate universe, somebody from a different time, so plucking things at random, but a person from the future, perhaps. It feels that maybe it's something that's plucked a bit more out of science fiction TV shows than something that would happen in reality. I'm not saying that aliens and ghosts are any less far-fetched, but it does just seem to be a bit of a random choice.
I agree, Tom. This feels just a bit too fantastical. And I know we're talking about ghosts and potentially aliens, but that just feels a touch more grounded to me than this is someone from another realm of reality.
But let's look at some more grounded explanations now. So from a non-believer's perspective, what's often commonly cited is the idea of this being just a lonely, outcasted human being, perhaps with no home, who opted to live in the woods, and he decided to just humour the children's games for the sake of a bit of fun, or to just have pull a bit of a prank, maybe.
I don't buy it for 1 minute.
No.
I mean, as I've already said, this was my initial inkling. The fact there is 0 evidence left by him. If these kids are going to misinterpret a lonely person in the woods as an alien, fair enough. But why would they then imagine this shack and all these other things? Like, it doesn't wash with me. Where's the shack then?
And what use does a homeless man have with a microphone and control panel?
Exactly. Again, another detail I keep forgetting. Why is he writing on a piece of paper? Why is he speaking to them using this microphone? It just doesn't make sense to me. And that's coming from a perspective of, this is where I was initially headed with it, until they scanned these woods and couldn't find any evidence. And why the siren then?
Exactly. Everything about his appearance, from the face paint to the weird hopping walk that he did, keep coming back to it, but the 3 digits, it's just, I feel like you would very obviously be able to tell if this was just a regular person. One of my favourite perspectives from the stance of a non-believer is that maybe the kids experienced some sort of shared hallucination, or either fell asleep and had a dream, perhaps. Interestingly, psilocybin mushrooms, or magic mushrooms, do grow wild on the Isle of Wight. Could the children have just indulged in a powerful drug without their knowing and witnessed what they witnessed? Could they have just put something that they saw that looked like food in the mouths, ate it, and then however long later they're seeing God knows what. It's an interesting one, isn't it? It's an interesting idea.
I really like this. This is a lot of fun, this theory. Do I think conceivably that 2 7-year-olds could see mushrooms growing and eat them? 100%. I think it's absolutely a possibility. I don't know that much about tripping on mushrooms and shared hallucinations, as you put it, but I'm sure it's perfectly possible that even if these girls have slightly different experiences, when they talk about it after, it can almost marry together.
And the other child has never come forward.
Interesting.
So we don't know if this other kid did say the same thing. What we have here is Faye's account, and everything's kind of, this story is just basically stemmed from her.
Wow, that is really interesting. So you don't even need the confirmation from the second child, really. So yeah, that it would also explain things like, well, firstly, how weird this fella presents himself, but also things like the siren. If I'm not mistaken, psilocybin mushrooms, you can have auditory hallucinations as well as visual ones. So, and I could be wrong on that, but again, that would explain why this kid is hearing it and the construction workers aren't. Yeah, I'm not saying I accept that 100% as what's happened, but it's a really interesting theory and one I really like.
And it would also explain why they didn't they didn't say that this was, it felt like a trip. If they'd have just eaten something off the floor that they didn't recognize, then they would have no reason to know that they were tripping.
As a kid back then, you'd have no idea what you'd ingested.
Yeah.
And, you know, a 7-year-old, I don't believe for a minute they would ever do it willingly to go on a mushroom trip.
Exactly.
Do you know what I mean? So, yeah, no, I totally agree with that point.
And again, one final take from the non-believer's perspective is that somehow Faye and her friend might have encountered an actual clown, perhaps an entertainer who was camping in the woods to save a bit of money. Sandown seafront at the time was full of clowns, full of entertainers, full of musicians, lots of festivals and entertainment, circuses and things going on. It's a very tenuous addition to add to this, but the phrase "all colours Sam" people have cited as sounding eerily similar to the phrase "Alakazam." Could he have just been a magician? We're linking it back to that idea of just somebody camping in the woods now. Maybe something like that is a little bit too weird to just be on the seafront, unless he was wearing kind of a well-crafted costume.
I'm not having it, Tom. Not for a minute. For the reasons I've said earlier, there's no evidence of him. And further to that, this guy doesn't sound like a clown.
No.
He sounds like he has elements that look like a clown, but the more I think about it, the more it sounds like that's how the kids are interpreting this. You know, whether they're seeing it on a trip or whatever. It sounds like they're seeing a yellow hat, they're seeing this makeup, and they think the closest thing to that, to me, looks like a clown. But how many clowns have you seen with no neck? How many clowns have you seen with a helmet or with 3 toes on each foot, walking barefoot through the woods, who live in a shack and use a microphone and a control panel to communicate? It just doesn't wash with me. And Alakazam, I am all colours Sam. Yeah, perhaps. But what about the other comments? What about, yeah, there are some others like me, but they're scared of humans. I'm kind of a man, but not really. Unless she's an extremely creepy individual, why are you talking like that to children? I just don't. I can't buy it. I can't buy it.
Yeah, I see where you're coming from, definitely. I do much prefer the idea of this being some sort of accidental trip, if anything, rooted in reality. And one thing to remember as well is that this was then quite a famous story to emerge on the Isle of Wight. You'd think that if it was an entertainer employed by a circus, somebody would be able to account for him. Somebody would be able to say, oh yeah, that's Pete. He's part of this show or whatever. That just hasn't happened. We don't have any evidence of somebody kind of taking accountability for employing this guy. If he was a magician or an entertainer, he's simply an enigma.
Yeah, and again, why are we hearing this siren then? Because if we're accepting that account, then let's root this in reality. There is no trip. Where's the siren? that these workmen don't hear? Why does this man in the woods, this entertainer, have a siren blaring? And why doesn't the search party find him or any evidence of him? Like, if you are scanning these woods, you're presumably going to find some evidence this fellow was about.
And the Isle of Wight, it's not a huge place. It's not going to take you too long to logistically search every part of it. Compared to, if he was seen on mainland England, you would have a lot of, it would be a lot more difficult to kind of pinpoint where he was. But providing that he stayed on the island, you'd think that eventually somebody would find him. No sign of him ever since. A few more things to add to the credibility or incredibility of the story. Faye, centering on her, while her exact identity, I believe, has not been pinned down, she has, so I've read, maintained her details of her encounter since she initially saw it, and her father did believe her. Something to add to that, though, however, is that her father, he was a bit of a paranormal buff himself. He claimed to have had several strange encounters on the island before Faye saw the clown, including seeing a UFO and spotting yellow eyes, as he said, peering from below the surface of the ocean. The specific nature of Faye's claims are so specific and detailed for a 7-year-old to have come up with. Could she really have come up with that on her own? Could her father have had a hand in that? Could he have instilled these ideas in her head?
I think this is a really important and interesting detail. On the one hand, the fact that she's never, as far as we know, gone back on a story is interesting, because you've probably heard there was some fairies once spotted in Yorkshire by a young girl. As she grows older, she admits, look, I imagined it, that kind of thing. I admit these weren't real. So, on the one hand, I would expect something similar from Faye. However, the angle of her father, having seen a UFO as well, he's obviously very interested in this stuff. The fact he believes her, well, initially I was surprised that he obviously knows her better than anyone, but now it makes a bit more sense. And part of me does wonder, has he talked to Faye about his encounter with UFOs? I mean, surely he would have done. And is he perhaps planting this seed? He doesn't even necessarily need to talk about them being UFO, but if he's talking about a craft that he sees, or I don't know what his encounter was specifically, or a green man who had 3 toes, who knows? It wouldn't surprise me if that seeped into Faye's consciousness. And interestingly, he made that point about seeing eyes in the ocean. I remember when I used to go to Scotland when I was a kid, you could see, I forget what it's called, but in the waves, there are literally green lights, quite bright green lights. I think it's algae or plankton or something that are reacting with goodness knows what. I don't know the science of it. But as the waves wash, you can see what you could absolutely conceive to be green eyes in the ocean. And I've experienced that, but I knew what they were. I knew it was these algae or whatever. So part of me wonders, is he a bit high on his own supply? His daughter is exposed to his passions and interests in this area. And, I'm not pinning this on the 7-year-old, but she almost wants to be part of that and sees what she wants to see. Or, maybe just imagines this and, gets something really quite interesting to talk about with her dad, which is fair enough. I don't know, but that's, I think, Tom, quite a big piece of the puzzle for me.
I agree completely. I think he very well may have seen something. Whether or not what he saw was paranormal, we can't tell. But if he is seeing what he perceives as aliens and strange lights and UFOs, some of that is just going to filter through to his daughter, isn't it?
I totally agree.
Especially if he's as interested in it as he sounds he is. He might be an unreliable source. He was big into all this idea, and if he planted the stories in his daughter's head, then maybe that debunks the whole thing. If not, the jury's still out. Ultimately, it does seem that perhaps the skeptic arguments do bear a little bit more weight, whether or not that's a trip or something that was planted in the daughter's head. The children were just 7 years old at the time the encounter took place. As you say, we can maybe attribute it to overactive imaginations spurred on by the excitement of being on holiday. Somebody could have simply been pulling a prank, or perhaps, Faye and her father even colluded together to come up with this story. Although it might seem far-fetched, it does remain one of the most beloved supernatural encounters of the whole of the British Isles, and the town of Sandown has completely embraced it as well. It is actually a reasonably popular tourist concept to come to Sandown to explore the story of the Sandown Clown. And you will see on YouTube that occasionally you'll have paranormal investigators who will make videos, go into Sandown, go into the woods near the golf links and trying to get a glimpse of what Faye and a friend saw that day. To my knowledge, there have been no reliable sightings of the Sandown Clown since this encounter with Faye, but nonetheless, it remains an interesting story, and I'm not sure if it would have even really been a bad thing to have encountered. I think if you're confident enough to sit with this guy for half an hour while he clearly presents no threat, and then you've got a pretty cool story out of it.
I would totally agree. I think as an adult hearing this, it's probably a lot creepier than it would be if you were a child and you saw this brightly coloured individual who was pretty harmless, effectively, from the sounds of it. I love that it's a British alien story. I'm probably a bit warmer to it because of that. But at the end of the day, like you say, we can't know what happened here, but it is a fantastic story. That I absolutely agree with.
So please do let us know what you think of this story. It's one of my favourites, and hopefully you've enjoyed it as much as we have. Until next time, I've been Tom.
And I've been Niall.
And we'll see you in the next episode. Thank you for listening. Don't forget you can reach out for more information or even submit a story at hello.campfirearchives@gmail.com. Alternatively, you can follow us on Instagram @campfire_archives. See you there.